Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and today I'm here with George Ortega. In this episode, we're gonna define and refute free will, just like we did in some of our earlier episodes, and we haven't done that in a while. So, for some of our newer listeners, we can go into the basic different ways of explaining why we don't have a free will and why it matters. And George, I know that you've covered this in a variety of ways on your show. There's the causality and the acausality way. There's also the subconscious, and there was something else too. I can't remember what it was though.
Well, there's nature and nurture. There's the hedonic principle, the fact we're always seeking pleasure and avoiding pain.
Yeah, the hedonic imperative. That I think that's a good way to start this one. Because we always do that which is the most pleasurable to us at the time in the current situation.
That's okay.
Yeah, and so here's the deal. We explained that people do what feels good and avoid what feels bad. People are primarily avoiding pain. But then someone like they try to come up with an example. Well, this person did did this even though it caused them pain because they felt it was the right thing to do. And in that case, what we're seeing is an example of someone getting greater satisfaction from doing the right thing, um, even though that might cause them some temporary pain in doing so.
Right. Another way to look at it is, let's say we draw an analogy between, because sometimes we'll put ourselves into more pain, for example, like going to the gym and starting to work out, maybe, losing weight, not eating as much. So we'll experience some pain in the present because we'll predict that that will lead to much greater pleasure in the future. And I think the analogy we can draw is when somebody has, like, for example, some money and they invested, let's say, in the stock market in some kind of investment, for a while, they don't have access to that money. It's kind of like they've lost that money, but, they predict that, eventually they'll have more money than they started out with by kind of like giving up control of a certain amount. So yeah, it's basically about the overall equation that we say to ourselves, well, if I put myself through a certain amount of pain now, I can expect or predict that that will lead to greater pleasure. So it's always about the overall equation.
Yeah, because it's not just about what gives us pleasure now, but what we predict will give us pleasure in the future. And what's interesting about that, like one way to explain it is nobody would do something that causes them pain if there wasn't some reward for it, some pleasure for it, you know?
Exactly. Like, for example, a lot of times, let's say we're a parent or someone like who has responsibility over, children, people. And so, like, in a lot of cases like that, parents will choose to kind of like deny themselves, to kind of like not do what they really want to do because they need to do what is the responsible thing to do. And like you were saying before, it's like there's two kinds of pleasure. There, perhaps there are several kinds, but one kind is the pleasure of really doing what you want to do. The other is the pleasure of doing what you know is right to do. So one is about satisfying your desires, your kind of like sensory desires and all, and the other, as you were saying before, is about satisfying your conscience. So there are two kind of pleasure, but we weigh them out. I think a lot of times we'll say, yeah, well, I will derive greater pleasure by satisfying my conscience, because if I don't, then I'm going to feel guilty, and that's going to be, so yeah, we go through that.
Yeah, and here's another thing to think about, George, is now with what you just mentioned there, how people they want to do the right thing because if they do the wrong thing, they'll feel guilty. And yet, that's something that only applies to people who believe in free will, because to someone who understands that they don't have a free will, they're not going to feel guilty. But there might be other reasons that they regret doing something.
Chandler, that's an excellent point. So you're right. So rather than feeling guilty under a non-free will perspective, they may not feel guilty, but they'll still feel bad. In other words, they'll acknowledge, like let's say, let's say for example, a kid needs to be picked up at school, but the parent wants to play golf instead, right? So like, so all right, so the parent might go to the school because not and let's say this person understands that nobody has a free will, not because of the guilt, but because they know that if they don't pick up the kid's gonna like be unhappy, and then even though they're not feeling guilty, you know about what they did, they'll, I think, emotions are contagious. They'll feel unhappy because their child is unhappy. So can you see, like, so like we might feel bad about a situation that about not doing the right thing, not because of the guilt that it would induce, but because of the displeasure, because we know it's the yeah, it's also it's a manifestation of the hedonic imperative. It gives us pleasure to satisfy our conscience. You're right, regardless of whether we would feel we whether or not we would feel guilty not satisfying.
Yeah, this really all fits into consequentialism because what happens is if we do something that causes us pain or causes somebody else pain, which most likely results in them causing us pain over us causing them pain, then we don't like that result and we think, oh, I wish I hadn't done this because look at all the trouble I started.
Exactly, exactly. So that's another part of the equation. They say, like, if if I cause another person, it's kind of like this idea of karma. And again, even though we don't have a free will, we seem to have a sense that, like, what we do comes back to us, both the good and the not so good.
Yeah, and in most cases that's true. You are rewarded and punished based on what you do. But what I think we could go into our next explanation of why how even though we're rewarded and punished for what we do, but it's not really up to us because what we've done under a determinist perspective, everything that happens has a cause. Therefore, anything we do has a cause, which had a cause, and it goes back to before we existed. But then the alternative, as you well know, is to say that some things happen for no reason at all, which would be indeterminism, would mean that some things happen for no reason, including us. That means we can't be the reason why we did something.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And how academics, how philosophers, and some psychologists and all don't understand this, how they continue to invoke this quantum indeterminacy as a way of trying to salvage free will. It's beyond me how they don't understand this. I mean, like, this is one of the challenges we're up against. I mean, it's basic logic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand why so many philosophers have tried to use indeterminism to somehow make room for free will. Because it's like they get that determinism cancels out choice, but then they start coming up with, well, maybe some things are random, and somehow they think that gives them free will.
And interestingly, we can use that as an additional illustration to show how we don't have free will, because, like, we tend to like to see ourselves as logical, rational beings. We tend to, like, want to, do what we believe or think or conclude what we believe makes sense. So, like, here we have, these philosophers, psychologists, they want to consider themselves reasonable. They want to be reasonable and be logical, but then you have these emotions, this emotional need to cling to this belief in free will that completely hijacks their reasoning. So and these emotions, it's not like they're up to them. It's not like they're deciding, of a free will to believe in free will. This is something they, for whatever reason, need to do.
Yeah, and another thing is, George, why do we want to see ourselves as logical, rational people?
Well, I think because, we, from our experience, I think maybe from what we've been taught, in a lot of ways, maybe not in all ways, but in a lot of ways, I think we're taught to trust. reason over emotion. Our emotions they can be very capricious at times. We could act on whim. We could just like, we learn that acting according to what we want and, these emotions can often get us into trouble when if we think things out and kind of like behave logically or rationally. I think most of us are taught or learn in other ways that that's a wiser course.
Yeah, well, I mean, we when we're thinking logically and we are understanding things correctly, then we end up doing better things, which cause us more pleasure. We're more effective at getting what we want.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, and so I mean, it seems to me very basic that through either causality or acausality, there's no way that we could be the first cause of something. But then there's also the unconscious aspect of it. People do things, but they don't know the reasons why they're doing them. Like for example, there was the hypnosis experiments where they would give them a post hypnotic suggestion, and then they would do stuff, and they didn't know why they did something, so they made up reasons. And then people like they're for example, people who watch more TV, like they're seeing all these food commercials and they're eating more. It's weird how people eat based on what's advertised to them. I mean, if people were aware of just how much their environment affects what they do, it would terrify them because they want to feel like they're in control.
Yeah, now we can kind of like explore that through two avenues. One, like for example, in terms of a simple decision of whether to pour, let's say, some water into two glasses, and we see that one of the glasses won't hold the water, it's not large enough. So then, so if we ask ourselves, well, why did we pour the water into the larger glass? We can know why we did that. So that's kind of like a simple kind of decision. But many of our decisions are just not so simple. Like, for example, at a restaurant, looking through this huge menu of all these items, I think a lot of people they just like they go on a whim, they go on a gut feeling or a hunch of what they feel will taste good, or like deciding what kind of job to take or whatever. These a lot there's a lot of complicated decisions where yeah, we we can only really guess at what the real reason is why we do things in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and sometimes we'll guess the right reason, and sometimes we'll guess the totally wrong reason. For example, I make guesses as to why things are done. For example, at my job, when customers buy alcohol, we put those glass bottles in like these little brown paper sacks, and they call them the alcohol bags. And for a long time, I was wondering, well, why do they do that? And I've never asked anybody, and I don't know if this is right, but I have a guess as to why they do that. And my guess was that theoretically, if somebody dropped it and it broke, that would at least help keep all of the glass shards together in that bag so that someone could dispose of it without getting cut. That was my theory.
Yeah, that's a good guess. Because then you might ask yourself, well, I mean, like for example, a jar of pickles could do the same thing, but you're not going to like wrap up a jar of pickles.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point. Why is it something specifically that they do with the alcohol, but that they don't do with the applesauce jars or the pickle jars?
it may be, I don't know, like there's different laws in different states, but I think in some, like you don't want to have the appearance of, like, for example, drinking in public or carrying, like, for example, if let's say you're going to like, you buy your groceries, but then you're going to go over to somebody's place, not with all your groceries, but just with, let's say, the wine or something. So I think they give you that extra bag so that you can carry it without walking in public, you know, appearing like you're drinking alcohol in public. I mean, That would be my guess. And you're right, we're only guessing. Who knows?
Right. But that's the point, is that I automatically just made that guess, you know, because I think that's what we do. Like, have you heard about the blind spot in our eyes that it doesn't actually see, but the brain fills in what should be in that part of the vision?
Wow, I haven't heard of that, but I've also heard like apparently we see things upside down, and
Yeah.
then our brain flips things. Yeah, amazing stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. It's like, just like image editors have an ability to flip images, vertically or horizontally. It's like our brain flips it vertically, what we're seeing, and I'm like, well, that's strange.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so we make guesses all the time without even realizing why we're doing it. So yeah, but to the extent that we are aware of why we're doing what we're doing, we'll see that it's because it causes us pleasure to do some things. Even if not now, it may cause us pleasure later on that we consider greater than the pain it may cause us now. But yeah, we can go so much further with this. Let's see. What were you going to say, something?
No, no, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about how things are done for reasons that we're not conscious of, and we've talked about the hedonic imperative, and we've talked about the causality and acausality thing. And let's see, I was thinking of something. Um, oh yeah. Then there's other bizarre things, like the fact that there's things that we want to do but we aren't actually able to make it happen. Like, for example, recently I've had these nights where I'm just not able to fall asleep. And why can't I just, flip a switch and turn myself off for the night? That's a fine example of how we now that particular thing is where we're unable to do something. It would seem simple that somebody should be able to just fall asleep if they want to, but
Yeah, we're given a choice. You either fall asleep or not. You're right. And most free will believers say, and then you know they might say, well, we don't have free will in everything. In some things we have a free will. And Chandler, I think we have to be a bit more honed in on what they're actually saying that have a free will to do and not. Because, like, for example, another thing aside from sleep that we could point out is like we were talking about this before, that, well, given a choice between eating, enough where we'll won't gain weight or will lose weight or not, obviously, that's not up to us. So, because like otherwise there would be no obesity problem.
yeah, I think that's a really fine example because that's something that's so popular. I mean, when I say it's popular, I mean there's a lot of obese people.
I know.
But yeah, basically, um, because yeah, you would think about if you would think about this, why would anybody be obese? Because it certainly isn't pleasant. Why would people be addicted to cigarettes and alcohol and cocaine, or whatever, whatever your particular drug might be? But yeah, these are great examples, because there's obviously some reason that we're craving certain things. And then there's also the example how what try not to think anything for 10 seconds.
Yeah, Chandler, I want to go back to this one. Stay with this for just another minute, and then we'll go right to that because that is a good one. But like, I think the major obstacle, in other words, like we can't choose to feel as good as we want to feel. In other words, like, sometimes we have negative moods, we become angry, sad, frustrated, afraid, and all. And so, like, you would think, well, if we have a free will, we can just choose to feel great all the time. And then the follow up question to that, well, if our free will does not allow us to feel good as good as we want, what good is it?
Yeah.
What good is a free will that doesn't allow you to like to prevent negative feelings or to experience positive feelings?
Yeah, why are so many people depressed? Why are they unhappy? If they could just choose to be happy or choose to just get over their negative feelings.
Right. So a free will believer say, well, fine, I can't choose, to feel as good as I want to or not feel as bad, but I can choose between an apple and an orange. And so we say to them, yes, a big deal. So what kind of free will is that?
Well, yeah, think about it. You're this free will that people claim to have. It doesn't let them it doesn't let them choose to be happy, and it doesn't let them choose to stop being obese. And it doesn't let them fall asleep. Um, well, come on. Where is the practical application of this free will they claim?
I know, and the happiness thing, I mean, like it has a quintessential importance because everything is about happiness. Why do we want to lose weight or not gain weight? Because we predict it'll make us happier. Why do we want to fall asleep when we want to? Because we want to, sleep enough to be happy. So, like, happiness is what everything is about. And if we can't freely choose to be happy or not to be unhappy, come on, yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to agree there, George, because if you can't be happy, I mean, if you don't have a choice in how happy you are, then I fail to see what good it is choosing between an apple or an orange. I mean, you're and aside from that, you're gonna eat whichever the apple or the orange or the banana or grape that causes you the most pleasure at that time.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, I think that this is an important thing because think about it. Psychologists, antidepressant medication, all that stuff would be gone if people could just choose to be happy. You know?
Oh, game over. The life would be a blissful, complete paradise.
Yeah,
And then some people will say, because I mean, hey, I run happiness groups. I kind of like, make myself and help other people make themselves happier all the time. But, a free will believer says, well, that's an example of free will. No. I mean, like, if we're able to do that, it's not that it's a freely will decision. We're lucky. We know we value happiness. We've learned how to do that, but obviously not everyone has.
yeah. I mean, and I actually, George, I don't see what's so hard for people to get about this. It's true that once you've learned a technique that helps you become happy, helps you lose weight, or helps you play chess better, or whatever it might be that you're wanting to do, it's yes, sometimes that information will help you, because you already want to do something, you already have that desire which you didn't choose, driving you toward wanting to be happy, or wanting to lose weight, or be the world's best golf player, or and then along comes the information that starts a reaction and gets the desired result.
Yeah, the question is, so why can't we do that all the time? I know.
Yeah.
So Chandler, yeah, you were beginning the discussion of like our not being able to like empty our minds, right? So go with that because that's also another excellent example of why we wouldn't have a free will.
Yeah, because if you ever try to not think of anything, it doesn't work. You end up thinking of something. You end up thinking about that you're trying not to think. Or it's like when someone tells you don't think of pink elephants. The first thing you're going to think of is pink elephants. Yeah.
Absolutely. But look, let's staying focused on like not being able to like clear our minds of thoughts. You know, once we accept that, and I don't think anybody can deny that. Some people might claim, well, no, if we meditate for 20, 30 years, we'll be able to do that. I doubt that. Even so the best we come up with is the one person out of like 7 billion may have free will, which would be absurd anyhow. But the idea then that follows from that is like if we can't clear our mind of these thoughts that we're having, then are we really responsible for the thoughts that we're having? In other words, like, we're trying to make our mind empty. These thoughts are coming up. Can these thoughts that come up possibly be freely willed if we're actually trying not to have them?
Yeah, because part of the problem with free will belief is it causes people to blame others for simply having thoughts. And this is really absurd because how can anyone choose to not have any given thought? Because that would mean you would have to think the thought before you think it. I think Sam Harris said something like that.
Absolutely. That's good.
Yeah, you would have to somehow predict in advance that you were going to think a certain thought, and then somehow modify your brain chemistry so that you didn't think that thought.
And the other thing is like, let's say, a person, says like, all right, I can choose an orange instead of an apple. Right. Now, here's what we can do to kind of like get the person to understand that it might be a quote unquote choice, but it can't be a freely chosen choice. It can't be a free choice because all we have to do is ask them, well, for example, why did you choose the orange instead of the apple? Sorry, the person might say, well, because I like oranges better than apples. Fair. Then we ask them, why do you like oranges better than apples? And at a certain point, even at that point, the person would have to admit, I don't know. So basically, the person is simply being programmed in a way that he's not even aware of to prefer oranges over apples.
Well, yeah, I mean, I love that because this brings the final example I want to use, explaining why we don't really have any choice at all. Because when we make a quote unquote choice, we do so based on our strongest desire, but the fact that we don't choose our desires, we don't choose which we like of the fruits, the apple or the orange better. We don't choose sexual preferences. We don't choose favorite colors. Remember Felicia? She tried to make her favorite color be something other than blue, but it didn't work. And it's like we're born a certain way, and we just have these preferences, so we can't give a reason as to why we prefer something more than other, but we do what we prefer.
Yeah, and a perfect analogy is we're kind of like organic computers. A computer will never freely choose anything because it's always choosing based on its programming. We're no different than computers. We just have organic programming in the form of genes and then these memories and all.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thought, isn't it, that obviously all of the memories that we have in our brains, our past experiences, and the desires are somewhere stored in cells somewhere in our brain, just like all the data on in a computer's RAM or hard drive, which the programs base their decisions on, is running. It's the same basic process. It's just that, as Jerry Coyne has said it before, we're wet robots.
Absolutely.
Because we're full of water, but we run pretty much the same as electrical machines.
Exactly. It's the same exact principle. We don't program ourselves, computers don't program themselves. And so, like, yeah, that's a perfect way to understand why we don't have a free will. If we can't program ourselves to be certain ways, obviously we're not doing things from a free will.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so plain, and I really think that somebody can make a case not just against libertarian types of free will, which for some reason tend to be based on indeterminism, but I also think that there's forms of compatibilist free will that also don't exist. Because you see all these examples of people not being able to do what they want.
Well, compatibilists, I mean, they're, they use what's known in philosophy as the classic straw man argument. They simply change the meaning of free will. They say, like, for example, if I do it, it's because I'm doing it that makes it a free will. It may not be up to me, but because I'm doing it. Now, do these people seriously think that that Darwin and Freud and Einstein would have bothered to like refute a free will like that? Do they seriously think that this is what this issue is really about?
Seriously, I don't see how anyone who has investigated the topic of free will at all can come to the idea that you have a free will just because it's you doing something. It's like, let's say your back itches. You didn't tell it to itch. You didn't choose or will it to itch. Your back just itches, but it was still your back to itch. Therefore, your back freely willed to itch.
Right, and we can apply that to a computer. A computer did a certain calculation, it did it. So are we going to say then, like, well, that means that it has a free will because it did it? It's absurd.
Yeah, and also all the cars that crashed into other cars in these big car wrecks. Well, it was the car that did it. So it's the car that freely willed, and the car should be punished.
Exactly. And another, I guess, compatibilist. Sometimes I get the it's so irrational, their explanation. Sometimes I can't differentiate whether it's a libertarian defense for free will or compatibilist. For example, some people will say that, well, you want to know something like, there's causality, and I guess this is compatibilist. Compatibilists will say there's causality, and that's sure. That kind of like, you know, it would seem no, they're saying that there is causality, but we still have a free will. And sometimes I think compatibilists will say that there are different kinds of causalities. There's a causality that applies to everything but human beings. That somehow, like, we because we're human beings, we have this magical power to circumvent this causality, which would otherwise render free will impossible.
And yeah, I find that very strange because, yeah, they believe that humans are somehow possess something extra. Like Mitch has talked about this, how they believe that humans have some extra thing that overrides the laws of nature, that somehow overcomes determinism. And how in the world does that even make sense? Because first of all, there's no way to say that humans have a free will by any definition without also applying that to dogs, cats, horses, pigs, whatever, because they're basically the same as us. But aside from that, you don't get a choice in whether you're human or not. You don't get to choose what species you are and what brain you have or soul if they try to throw a soul into the mix. So how is it up to
Yeah, Chandler, hopefully we'll get more people on the podcast tomorrow. And I've got a list of a lot of different kinds of free will defenses that have been proposed. And it might be good if, like, maybe this is like, refuting free will part one. And maybe tomorrow, if the group has agreed, we can continue on this and just go one by one with these defenses of free will. And each of us, we take turns kind of like explaining to the audience why that just does not give us a free will. Why either it's a miss, it's a redefinition of the term free will, or why it's illogical in some way.
Yeah, that sounds like a great plan. So we'll consider this part one of refuting free will defenses, and then we'll probably do some more of that tomorrow if the co-hosts agree. So, did you want to end this episode?
Yeah, I think we've covered enough. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have. Okay, you've been listening to Chandler Klebs and George Ortega on free will, science, and religion, and I hope you've enjoyed our brief explanation of different ways of understanding we don't have a free will, and we'll probably be continuing this in future episodes. So, thank you for listening, and goodbye.